So good evening, everybody. I'm Marita de Wet. It's my privilege tonight to welcome you to the lecture. The lecture forms part of the Analytical Psychology Lecture Series, which is offered by the Southern African Association of Jungian Analysts, lovingly called SAJA. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your presence and your support, and we hope the time you spent with us tonight will be rewarding and personally meaningful. As we learn about the hero's journey, we'll develop a more nuanced understanding of our own individuation process. Let me introduce you to my colleague and our speaker tonight, Denise Grobelaar. Denise is a Jungian analyst and clinical psychologist working in private practice in Pinelands in Cape Town. She is affiliated with SAJA and also the International Association of Jungian Analysts. Denise has a long-standing interest in dream work, shadow work, consciousness, shamanism, mysticism, and mythology. If I put it all together, it looks like analytical psychology. Her paper, The White Lion as a Symbol of the Archetype of the Self and the Cannibalization of the Self in Canned Hunting, was published in the 2020 spring issue of the Jung journal called Culture and Psyche. Denise has been in private practice since November 2011 in Pinelands. Denise, without further ado, eager to hear what you have for us tonight, over to you.
Thank you for the introduction, Marita. Let me take you on a journey. And I just want to start off the presentation with a little video clip.
The most important thing that myths teach us is to go beyond the limits of our possibility.
Joseph Campbell was one of the leading mythology experts of all time.
He diagrammed all of our stories. Find this one story within all the stories that we can relate to no matter where you come from. And he called it the hero's journey.
All the heroes, all the villains, they're all in there because they're all in here. This is where they come from.
In other words, we're not separate from the characters we see in our movies and in our novels. They are us. It's one journey. If this path of the hero's journey is fairly simple, why then is it that everybody isn't living it?
It's very difficult for a person with the media, with advertising. There's no creativity.
You end up on that treadmill and you can't get off.
We are each our own greatest inhibitors.
The one thing that keeps people small is their fears, or as Campbell says, it's their dragons.
It's a beast, it's a monster.
I'll never forget seeing the ramp and this wave of fear just crashed over me.
It's going from an unsatisfying life to a satisfying life by pushing through the scariest things you can imagine.
I think people wake up to the fact that they're the hero of their own life when they get tired of being the victim of it.
This idea that our greatest selves are still hidden and that what we do with our lives is what makes us heroes.
Once I saw what was possible with a skateboard in your hand, I had to keep going. I mean, I just wanted to fly.
This is it. This is what happens when we follow our quest. Magical things happen that we couldn't have imagined.
Do something that gives you that moment.
But if you can do that, then you can achieve the impossible.
The great obstacle for most of us is ourselves. If we can overcome that basic fear, in Campbell's terms, we can all be heroes.
There's a common thread that runs through myth and legend, across stories told throughout the world, And Joseph Campbell described this thread as the monomyth of the hero's journey. And to provide a framework and overview of this presentation, I would like to start off with a concise summary of the hero's journey in the words of Joseph Campbell from his book, A Hero with 1,000 Faces. He says, the mythological hero, setting from his common day hut or castle, is lured, carried away, or else voluntarily proceeds to the threshold of adventure. There he encounters a shadow presence that guards the passage. The hero may defeat or consolidate this power and go alive into the kingdom of the dark, which could be the dragon battle, a brother battle, dragon battle, offering charm, or be slain by the opponent and descend into death, dismemberment or crucifixion. Beyond the threshold, then, the hero journeys through a world of unfamiliar yet strangely intimate forces, some of which severely threaten tests, some which gives him magical aid, the helpers. He goes further then, he says, when he arrives at the nadir of the mythological round, he undergoes a supreme ordeal and gains his reward. The triumph may be represented as the hero's sexual union with the goddess mother of the world, of the sacred marriage, his recognition by the Father Creator or Father Atonement, or his own divinization process or apophysis. Or again, if the powers have remained unfriendly to him, his theft of the boon he came to gain, which could be a bride theft, a fire theft. Intrinsically, it is an expansion of consciousness, and therewith of being, and it could be illumination, transfiguration, and freedom. And then finally, the final work of the return. If the powers have blessed the hero, he now sets forth under their protection. If not, he flees and is pursued. And there's often these funny stories about obstacle flights or flights from dragons or demons where some have stolen the treasure. At the return of a threshold, the transcendental powers must remain behind, and the hero re-emerge from the kingdom of the dead, the dread. And this is the return of the resurrection. The boon that he brings into the world, restores the world. Now that's quite a lot of information, and I hope to unpack that in this presentation to really explain what Campbell meant by the hero's journey. And I really would like the audience to, when I talk about the hero, it's inclusive of the male and female. It's not the hero as a man, it is men and women. And so please, if you kind of listen with that ear. So Campbell named the basic outline of this universal mythological formula of the adventure of a hero or heroine, with deeply significant motives of the perils, obstacles, and good fortunes encountered during the journey as the monomyth. Campbell states, the standard path of the mythological adventure of a hero is a magnification of a formula represented in the rites of passage. There's a separation, initiation, and a return, which may be named under the nuclear unit of the monomyth. He says that adventure of the hero normally follows the path of separation from the world, a penetration to some source of power, and a life-enhancing return. He describes the stages, as set out on the diagram, of a heroic journey as natural, universal expressions of archetypal patterns. The hero's journey was Campbell's metaphor for a deep inner journey of transformation. The hero archetype represents the potential in human beings to follow the impulse to something greater in their lives and to achieve their own highest unique potential. The hero's journey is a dynamic process that can serve as a conceptual metaphor for understanding and accessing individual development. Similar stories across cultures are, according to Campbell, expressions of the unconscious and conscious struggles of men and women all over the world. And we might get into this in the discussion, part, but if we look at this diagram, this is something that Campbell believes every human being goes through. Maybe not all of the ingredients, but it's like a master recipe. Campbell states, the whole sense of ubiquitous myth of the hero's passage is that it shall serve as a general pattern for men and women. Therefore, it is formulated in the broadest terms. The individual has only to discover his own position with reference to this general human formula, and let it then assist him past his restriction walls. So you can adjust the recipe, only using some of the ingredients and not others. What does your hero's journey look like? What elements are present for you? Let's dive into the first phase of departure. This is often where most people get stuck. As Michael Mead says, the problem in most situations is not a lack of calling, but a fear of responding to the call. The call to adventure sets the story rolling by disrupting the comfort of a hero's ordinary world, presenting a challenge or a quest that must be undertaken. The call throws the ordinary world off balance. At the beginning of the quest, the hero is drawn forward into a new and terrifying path. Campbell writes, the first stage of a mythological journey, which has been designated the call to adventure, signifies that destiny has summoned the hero. This fateful region of both treasure and danger may be variously represented as a distant land, a forest, a kingdom underground, beneath the waves or above the sky, a secret island, a lofty mountaintop, or a profound dream state. The hero can go forth of his own violation to accomplish the adventure, or he can be carried or sent aboard by some benign or even malignant agent, as was Odysseus, driven about by the Mediterranean Sea by the wings of the angered god Poseidon. The adventure may begin as a mere blunder. Apparently, the merest chance reveals an unsuspected world, and the individual is drawn into a relationship with forces that are not rightly understood. As Freud has shown, blunders are not the merest chance. They are the result of suppressed desires and conflicts. They are ripples on the surface of life, produced by unsuspected springs, and these may be very deep as the soul itself. The blunder may amount to the opening of destiny. How many times in your life something has happened and you think, oh my word, how could something like that happen to me? And where could it take you potentially? Within the pattern of the hero's journey, there is always a messenger of some sort to announce or herald the call to adventure. Now, this messenger isn't always human. It may be a dream. It may be an event. Campbell states, whether dream or myth, in these adventures there is the atmosphere of an irresistible fascination about the figure that appears suddenly as a guide, marking a new period or a new stage in the biography of the person. So the call may come to you or anyone through some extraordinary experience or encounter or an epiphany, or the call is heralded through a friendly stranger, perhaps an invite somewhere, a dark foreboding, or a blinding light, a chance encounter, or perhaps a depression, or a physical illness or near-death experience. James Hillman has said, troubles are calls from the gods. What is the call in your daily life? Who issues this call? And the question really is, are you listening to your soul or the egoic mind? Success of a heroic journey depends on whether the call comes from soul and its vast underground inhabited by changeable archetypal forces, or the fear-based, safety-seeking ego, whose preference is to operate in predictable and controllable environments. Are your ideals and goals ego-driven, or perhaps even shadow-driven? Or are you listening to your soul? And how do we know the difference? According to the Isis mystery, one should not hesitate when called, nor hasten when not commanded. This cautions against mistaking boredom or running away from problems for a legitimate calling. The call draws us forward into taking the initial risk without a readily available vision. We don't always know what the future would look like or where our decisions might take us. And on some level, we need a stimulating and sustaining vision of the possibilities that lie ahead. But this can only come to us once we are on the journey and once we've taken the step after confronting the shadow guardians at the threshold of leaving home. And I'll talk more about these shadow guardians. The new vision comes when we develop the visionary within us and the capacity to see with new eyes and from new perspectives. As Rumi assures us, as you start to walk the way appears. Rumi also asks, when will you begin that long journey into yourself? Campbell writes, as apprehended by the mystics, it marks what has been termed the awakening of the self. But whether small or great, and no matter what the stage or grade of life, the call rings up the curtain, always, on the mystery of transfiguration, a rite, a moment of spiritual passage, which, when complete, amounts to a dying and a birth, or should we maybe call it a rebirth. The familiar life horizon has been outgrown. The old concepts, ideals, and emotional patterns no longer fit. The time for the passing of a threshold is at hand. Once the call has been heralded, one is now faced with the choice of rising to the challenge or giving up. The call always presents a challenge to the status quo, to one's comfort with the familiar and the secure. Life events serve as the call to adventure of soul. Such predicaments can lead to resignation or disintegration, or they can activate untapped resources within the potential hero. And sometimes one is really just stuck in that choice, not really going either way. Campbell wrote, the myths and folk tales of the whole world makes it clear that the refusal is essentially a refusal to give up what one takes to be one's own interest. Campbell indicates that one may choose to either accept or refuse the call to adventure, and the choice profoundly affects the individual. Refusal separates them from their essence. Those who refuse the call continue to live their life, cast in the role of the victim. In myth and legends, they may be victims of the whims of gods or fortune, with no control over the events of their lives. Too often, however, people shrink away from the call because it is challenging and it appears to be difficult, and indeed, it is difficult. Not choosing is sometimes motivated by a fear of the herald. Or at other times, it may be a kind of holding out for the best offer. Maybe something better will come along. Campbell wrote, refusal of the summons converts the adventure into its negative. Walled in boredom, hard work, or culture, the subject, meaning the person, loses the power of significant affirmative action and becomes a victim to be saved. His flowering world becomes a wasteland of dry stones, and his life feels meaningless. All he can do is to create new problems for himself and await the gradual approach of his disintegration. Refusal of the call is ultimately a defiance of our higher self, or what Jung would call the archetype of the self, of our passions, our destiny, of our own deities, and the desertion of the gifts that they bring and offer, and thereby demonizing them as adversaries. Those who refuse the call lose perception of their ability to effect change in their own lives. Those who choose to accept the call to adventure begin the journey with the crossing of the threshold from the known into the unknown, which is often fraught with danger. The unknown is terrifying to most people. But should you choose to take that leap or that risk into the face of the unknown danger, this will be the start of what Jung called the journey of individuation, the journey of becoming your unique self. The archetypal pattern of a hero's journey often involves help from some supernatural source to help them start their journey. This is often called meeting the mentor. The archetype of the mentor is about right guidance. Campbell states, even for those who don't answer the call immediately, help is available. Often the individual who is reluctant to answer the call is also visited by such a figure, whether by the cosmic mother or a mercurial trickster figure, Hermes or Mercury. And this might often come in the form of a person that comes into your life that really upsets everything and really throws your own ideas out the window. This supernatural principle or archetype is called the one who initiates. Campbell describes the importance of such a figure. What such a figure represents is the benign, protecting power of destiny. Protective power is always and ever present within the sanctuary of the heart, and even immanent within, or just behind, the unfamiliar features of the world. One has to only know and trust, and the ageless guardians will appear. Having responded to his own call and continuing to follow courageously as consequences unfold, the hero finds all the forces of the unconscious at his side. Mother Nature herself supports the mighty task, and insofar as the hero's act coincides with that which his society itself is ready, he seems to ride on the great rhythm of the historical process. Examples would include the helpful crone and fairy godmother, which is a familiar theme in the European fairy lore. In Christian saints' legends, the role is commonly played by the Virgin. Spider-Woman from the First Nations of America is another example, the ferryman, the conductor of souls to the afterworld. In classical myth, this is Hermes Mercury. In Egyptian mythology, it's usually Thoth, which is the ibis god, the god of knowledge and wisdom. There is a saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. But how do we recognize these figures in our lives? How do we know which teacher or mentor is the right one? How do we choose? Because often our fears and our lack of trust of such figures may prevent us from responding to the call. Although the hero or heroine would cross many thresholds in his or her journey, the crossing of a first threshold is incredibly important, as it marks the start of a journey. Campbell writes, "For the crossing of a threshold is the first step into the sacred zone of the universal source." At the peripheries of the known or conventional world, there is a threshold where you will encounter guardians. Campbell writes, "The folk mythologies populate with deceitful and dangerous presences every desert place outside the normal traffic of a village. Such demons, at once dangerous and bestowers of magic power, every hero must encounter who steps an inch outside the walls of his tradition. The terrors will recede before a genuine psychological readiness. The overbold adventurer beyond his depth may be shamelessly undone. These gatekeepers seem fierce, dark, and dangerous, and are meant to scare off the frivolous traveler, ensuring that only the worthy embark on the journey, as this is a sacred journey, this life we live. The guardians test our resolve, our commitment and intention, thereby challenge us to become stronger, more confident, better prepared for the tests and trials that lies ahead. As the journey continues, the hero gains confidence and courage in his and her ability to survive these threshold crossings. Campbell writes about the protective aspect of a threshold guardian. These threshold guardians are there to keep one insulated within the protection of your community, thereby limiting the individual to the prescribed life experiences possible in that specific community. This prohibitive principle that discourages us to proceed with life's journey may manifest as social inhibition, or a critical super-ego thinking pattern which represent any potentially dangerous impulses or what we would call immoral choices or amoral choices. Or lastly, the cognitive rational mind struggles to process uncertainties and fear the unknown. However, in order to grow and transform our consciousness, we must step out of our protective bubbles into the unknown. Campbell writes, "One had not better challenge the watcher of the established bounds, and yet it is only by advancing beyond those bounds, provoking the destructive other aspect of the same power, that the individual passes, either alive or in death, into a new zone of experience." Once we know how to respectfully engage with these guardians, they become allies, not only allowing us through, but also empowering us. However, be forewarned, they will destroy the carefully curated belief system to which they don't prescribe. It might be useful to discover rituals and ceremonies that can serve as rites of passage that allow safe access across these thresholds between these two worlds, the known and the unknown. Creating safe portals may involve finding appropriate teachers, safe experiences, establishing spiritual practices, learning to trust the inner guidance, meditation, or joining a community of like-minded and mutually committed seekers. But most importantly, from our knowledge about trauma, this also includes learning emotional self-regulation techniques to calm our central nervous system so that we can embark on this journey. Campbell writes, "The Arcadian god Pan is the best known classical example of this dangerous presence dwelling just beyond the protected zone of a village boundary. The emotion that he instilled in human beings who by accident ventured into his domain was panic, fear, a sudden, groundless fright. Any trifling cause then, the breaking of a twig, the flutter of a leaf, would flood the mind with imagined danger. Yet, Pan was benign to those who paid him worship. These threshold guardians often take the form of dangerous and threatening dragons or demons, since our first threshold guardian is indeed our own shadow, aptly described by the poet Robert Bly as the long bag we drag behind us. When we befriend the shadow or first threshold guardian, we can start with our journey and move forward. But this is no easy task. What are your demons, the dragons you are fighting in your life? And I know this is often a difficult thing to think about, but how can these obstacles in your life be turned into empowering allies? And it's not about what we might call positive or toxic positivity and say, see a silver lining in the trauma, but really learning from it. Because we can choose to lie down when things get difficult and when we're suffering, or perhaps we can choose to stand up and fight, or seek help to empower us to learn how to fight. It is difficult to recognize them as potential allies at a time when they threaten you, especially when they come in the form of a debilitating depression or a life-destroying addiction. And Campbell says, should you prevail, these threshold guardians do prepare us for the life journey ahead. How can you overcome and vanquish them, since dragons and demons of darkness may indeed kill and eat the hero or heroine, forcing him or her to resurrect in a new form? What are your weaknesses or bad habits or addictions that is killing you and eating you right now? Will you ultimately find new life, like Jonah's deliverance from the belly of the whale? Campbell states, the idea that the passage of the magical threshold is a transit into a sphere of rebirth is symbolized by the worldwide womb image of the belly of the whale. The hero, instead of conquering or consolidating the power of the threshold, is swallowed into the unknown and would appear to have died. Passing across the first threshold may initially result in neither success nor failure. The hero may become undone, often hanging in limbo for extended periods, weeks, months, years, sometimes decades, and then eventually triumph. Here is the story of one who seemingly fails, whether his courage fails him or cannot let go of his need for safety, security, familiarity, and comfort. Perhaps help didn't come, and it wasn't safe to embark on the journey, and the person was truly lost. A transformation seemingly interrupted, a journey towards wholeness incomplete. The hero's rite of passage can be a personal confrontation with the forces of inertia, which places obstacles in the path. These forces of inertia are often created by the part of themselves that holds the hero or heroine back with an inner command to keep the innocent one safe, an attempt to protect our vulnerable parts from harm. And this is what we may call the trauma complex, having its origins in the early relationships to our immediate environment, our life circumstances, familial and cultural expectations, and where our natural instincts were perhaps dulled down and projected onto these wild nature gods. This is the dragon of the self-sabotaging pattern, which embodies our inner struggles. with deeply embedded fears, shame, rage, and grief that are shaping our choices in life, often largely outside our awareness. To cross the threshold is to risk self-annihilation, because our sense of identity is firmly attached to our social roles or public persona, or perhaps even our ego, the idealized self that we think we are. So there is often a descent in the journey into the realm of the unknown, into darkness. For example, Jonah's journey to the belly of the whale in the Bible is a descent into the dark, vast, archaic unconscious, from which he ultimately emerged transformed. Campbell reminds us of the oldest record of a descent into the underworld, and this is the Sumerian myth of the goddess Inanna's descent into the netherworld. Inanna and Ereshkigal, the two sisters, light and dark respectively, the one goddess in the two aspects, and their confrontation epitomize the whole sense of a difficult road of trials. The hero discovers and assimilates this opposite either by swallowing it or being swallowed by it. And then he finds that he and his opposites are not two different species, but one flesh. The threshold guardians bring us face to face with those seemingly irreconcilable opposites, which might crucify us if we don't approach carefully. What are some of the opposites we need to reconcile in ourselves? Our light and our dark side. The good and the bad that lives in potential in all of us. We are not just all love and light. We are also the darkness, and the darkness is the earth, and being part of the earth, which we have obscured from ourselves. Some of the other opposites we need to reconcile might be that wounded inner child, or what might be called the injured innocent, that needs to learn to trust and accept the wisdom of the inner elder and wise woman or man archetype, just as this elder needs to embrace the innocent wonder, the spontaneity, the joy, and the playfulness of the child that might have been suppressed, even crushed by the struggles of our lives. The inner feminine and the inner masculine needs to recognize each other's sovereignty and form a powerful alliance of interdependence instead of being at war with each other for dominance. Our dreams, active imagination, and visionary experiences often offer emerging visions of potential reconciliation with these shadow patterns. After surviving his first major test, the hero is presented with a series of challenges. So he accepted the invitation. You took up opportunity to do a course, to go overseas, whatever it was that you said yes to, that you were frightened to do, that was your crossing of the first threshold. Life is full of challenges, difficulties, tests, and trials. However, the biggest challenge is what happens in our inner world as we move through the external world. How do we remain, or do we remain in what we would call an ego perspective in our relationship to the external world? Or do we start to dance with soul? Campbell writes, the original departure into the land of trials represent only the beginning of the long and really perilous path of initiatory conquests and moments of elimination. Dragons now have to be slain, and surpassing barriers passed again and again and again. Meanwhile, there will be a multitude of preliminary victories and retainable ecstasies and momentarily glimpses of a wonderful land. The ordeal is a deepening of a problem of the first threshold. And the question is still in balance. Can the ego put itself to death? For many-headed is this surrounding hydra, one head cut off and two more appear. And I think many of you are well aware of how the ego doesn't give up its idea that it is in charge of our life. The journey of individuation, as captured by the hero's journey, is about establishing the right relationship between ego and the archetype of the self. The ego, as the many-headed hydra, does not want to give up its seat of power. But however, it's not about killing the ego, but avoiding fueling its petty desires of fame, fortune, relevance, and self-importance as compensations of being caught in the duality between grandiosity and unworthiness. A helpful concept here is the Buddhist concept of nirvana, which means the extinguishing of a threefold fire of desire, hostility, and delusion. When the ego no longer feels shame, or pride, or greed, or alienation, or anger, or lust, the ego has no need to identify with the archetype of the self, and therefore then quietly assumes its proper role in serving the self. And we can reach our highest potential without becoming inflated or grandiose about who we are in the world. The journey remains difficult and challenging. Campbell writes, this stage involves the crossing of multiple thresholds and repeated tests and trials. He says, the agony of breaking through personal limitations is the agony of spiritual growth. As the hero-heroine crosses threshold after threshold, conquering dragon after dragon, the stature of a divinity that he summons to his highest wish increases until it subsumes the cosmos. Finally, the mind breaks the bounding sphere of the cosmos, to a realization transcending all forms of form, all symbolizations and all divinities, a realization of the ineluctable void. Now that is quite a mouthful, and hopefully as we go further we can really unpack and understand what he meant with this. As the journey continues, we keep on confronting outdated beliefs. These beliefs are our early conclusions, really before our cognitive thinking developed. Our deep-seated assumptions, which have become our personal myths, and the immature behavioral patterns, often reflecting the shadow, but these that has been with us since childhood, how we've perhaps incorrectly learned this is how we can get love, attention, and nurturance from those around us. We circle around the self, delving deeper and deeper into the same issues, whose multi-layered complexity are often not visible to us at first. You know, we might think we've done the work, we've been here, we've worked with this, and then we just go deeper and deeper into the roots of these things that hinder us from reaching our potential. Campbell states, as it so happens that if anyone in whatever society undertakes for himself a perilous journey into the darkness by descending, either intentionally or unintentionally, into the crooked lanes of his own spiritual labyrinth, he soon finds himself in a landscape of symbolic figures, any one of them which may swallow them. And in the vocabulary of the mystics, this is the second stage of the way, that of the purification of self, when the senses are cleansed and humbled, and the energies and interests concentrated upon the transcendental things, or in the vocabulary of the modern term, it is the process of dissolving, transcending or transmuting the infantile images of our personal past. An important marker in the hero's journey is the union between the masculine and the feminine. Campbell writes, "The ultimate adventure, when all the barriers and ogres have overcome, is commonly represented as a mystical marriage of a triumph hero soul," and this is men and women, with the queen goddess of the world. This is the crisis at the nadir, the zenith, or the uttermost edge of the earth, at the central point of the cosmos, in the tabernacle of the temple, or within the darkness of the deepest chamber of the heart. True initiation requires meeting the feminine, represented by a goddess who provides secret knowledge or magic potions. Moving through this stage of the journey, the hero or heroine needs the feminine qualities of intuition, resonance, and receptivity, in addition to the masculine qualities of determination, willpower, and penetrative forward movement. The feminine is represented in Sophia as the personification of wisdom, an antidote to ignorance, which manifest as limitations and a restriction of consciousness. Campbell writes, "The mystical marriage with the queen goddess of the world represents the hero's total mastery of life. Every failure to cope with a life situation must be laid in the end to a restriction of consciousness. Wars and temper tantrums are the makeshift of ignorance. Regrets or illuminations come too late. And in the office of the modern psychoanalyst, the stages of the hero adventure come to light again in the dreams and hallucination of the patient. Depth beyond depth of self-ignorance is phantom, and with the analyst in the role of the helper or the initiatory priest." I think often when people start therapy, they think they know themselves. And as they go along, they think they know themselves a little bit more until they come to a point, and speaking from my own experience, where you actually just realize that one's own ignorance is absolutely huge, and we never fully know ourselves. As much as the feminine in her totality needs to be integrated, so does the totality of the masculine. In most mythologies, the images of mercy and grace are rendered as vividly as those of justice and war, so that a balance is maintained, and the heart is buoyant rather than scourged along the way. The mystery of the apparently self-contradictory father, a cruel, punishing, versus loving father God, is resolved in a true meeting with the father archetype, where the masculine forces are redeemed. Campbell writes, "The problem of the hero going to meet the father is to open his soul beyond terror, to such a degree that he will be ripe to understand how sickening and insane the tragedies of this vast and ruthless cosmos are, completely validated in the majesty of being." The hero transcends life with its particular blind spot, and for a moment rises to a glimpse of the source. He beholds the face of the Father and understands, and the two are atoned. He is then twice born. He has become himself the Father and representative of the impersonal cosmic force. So this is applicable to both men and women, and I think for many women in therapy, they've worked with the father complex or the image of their own personal father, as well as men working with the image of mother, and vice versa. Campbell writes, "For the ogre aspect of a father is a reflex of the victim's own ego, sealing the potential adult spirit from a better balanced, more realistic view of the father and thereby of the world. Atonement, or at-one-ment, consists in no more than the abandonment of that self-generated double monster. But this requires abandonment of the attachment to the ego itself, and that is difficult. What does Campbell mean? Our emotional relationship to the internalized parental images dictates how we see and experience the world. If we see our father, a god or masculine, as an ogre, a monster, we will fear the world to be that too. Campbell stresses that the unconscious, or perhaps even conscious and rationalized motives of self-aggrandization will drive our behavior unless we effectively can purge of all inappropriate infantile motivations. So it's all those childish notions that we have inside ourselves that is preventing us from becoming what now called that we can do adulting better. After the confronting the father and becoming the father, a process which is completely internal and has got nothing to do with the external and real father, the hero or heroine can rise to the status of godhood. And remember, this includes the step before of having integrated the feminine. Campbell writes, like the Buddha himself, this godlike pattern, a godlike being, is the pattern of a divine state to which the human hero attains, who has gone beyond the last terrors of ignorance. When the envelopment of consciousness has been annihilated, he has become free of all fear, beyond the reach of change. This is the release potential within all of us, and which anyone can attain through becoming a hero inside himself. Yet, as we know, this is not an easy process, and our internal stories imprison us inside ourselves, preventing us from going forward into this. Campbell writes, the gods and the goddesses are to be understood as embodiments and custodians of the elixir of the imperishable being, but not themselves the ultimate in its primary state. What the heroes seek through his intercourse with them is therefore not to be found in themselves, but their grace, the power of their sustaining substance, basically our personal power. This miraculous energy substance, and this alone, is the imperishable, the names and the forms of the deities who everywhere embody, dispense, and represent. It comes and goes. They are purely representations. So having risen to the status of godhood, the hero can now access the gifts of the gods, which is the ultimate boon. And we need to understand this metaphorically, not literally. What is the ultimate boon? Claiming the treasure is an initiation into a new and different way of life, and the hero can never simply go back to the old ways. We cannot unknow what we now know. Denial is no longer an option. Only the truth can accompany the hero from here on. True initiation opens one's eyes to an awakening and reveals mysteries beyond our wildest dreams. It brings true inner strength, personal power, and a clear and purposeful vision.
Many years ago in Thailand, there was a temple that was called the Temple of the Golden Buddha. And there was a huge statue of Golden Buddha. came to this village where the monastery was that an army from a neighboring country was about to invade. And they got the brilliant scheme to cover the golden Buddha, which is quite large, with mud and concrete so that it looked basically like a stone Buddha, and the army would perceive no value in it. And sure enough, this army rolled in with its caissons and weapons. And as they passed by the monastery, they saw nothing but a big stone Buddha, and they had no reason to plunder it. Well, years went by because the army continued to occupy it, until there was a time in the monastery in the village when no one remembered that the Buddha was golden, until one day a young monk was sitting on the Buddha meditating on his knee. And as he got up, a little piece of concrete happened to crack off, and he saw something shiny. He realized it was gold under there. And so he ran to his fellow monks and said, "The Buddha's golden, the Buddha's golden." They all came out and they realized he was telling the truth. And they took their picks and hammers, and eventually they unearthed the golden Buddha. Now, what's the metaphor here? The metaphor is that each of us is golden by nature. We were born golden. We were born high. We were born knowing. We were born connected to our bliss. We were born knowing truth. We were born knowing everything that every great spiritual master has ever said. We were one with the Christ, the Buddha, everyone. But then we went to school and they said you have to dress like this, and this is what boys do, and this is what girls do, this is what black people do, this is what white people do, on and on and on. And so we developed a casing of stone over the Buddha, to a point where at a young age, maybe 4, 5, 6, or 7, we believed that we were the stone Buddha, not the golden one. And then something comes along that cracks our casing. Maybe it's an injury, a divorce, a financial setbacks, a governmental change, something that really scares us and bugs us and knocks off a piece of our armor. And only in that moment of the armor being knocked off do you get to look inside and see the gold. And let me tell you, friend, that the moment you see that gold, the armor and the concrete will never satisfy you again. At that point, you truly enter the true hero's adventure. And all you want to do for the rest of your life is pick away the stone, because the gold is so much more fun.
What are you looking for in life? Are you looking for the right things? What may be the treasure we seek, if not the fountain of youth and immortality? Campbell calls bringing back the boon the work of representing eternity in time and perceiving in time eternity. This is what Campbell says. All things are in process, rising and returning. Plants come to blossom, but only to return to the root. Returning to the root is like seeking tranquility. Seeking tranquility is like moving to its destiny. To move to its destiny is like eternity. To know eternity is enlightenment, and not to recognize eternity brings disorder and evil. Knowing eternity makes one comprehensive. Comprehension makes one broad-minded. Breadth of vision brings nobility, and nobility is like heaven. The heavenly is like Tao, and Tao is the eternal, and the decay of the body is not to be feared. As the hero sets on his return journey, there is one final obstacle, the crossing of the return threshold. The story of Odysseus tells us about the complexity of a return journey, especially if there is confusion about what course to take. Campbell writes, "This brings us to the final crisis of a round, to which this whole miraculous excursion has been but a prelude, that, namely, of the paradoxical, supremely difficult threshold crossing of a hero's return from the mystic realm, into the land of a common day, whether rescued from within, Whether rescued from without, driven from within, or gently carried along by guiding divinities, he has yet to re-enter with his boon the long-forgotten atmosphere where men who are fractions imagine themselves to be complete. He has yet to confront society with his ego-shattering, life-redeeming exiliar and take the return blow of reasonable queries, heart resentment, and good people at a loss to comprehend. What the hell is this person talking about? Campbell states that the returning hero or heroine must survive the impact of the world. At the return threshold, the supernatural world stays behind, but the hero still needs to face his own and other people's fears, insecurities, and the pressures of fitting into the norms of society and the known world. The hero's own fear of being different, fear of being rejected or ostracized, even cancelled, and the lure of complacency and the self-sabotage of the unworthiness might lead to a premature ending to his or her hero's journey. A hero's journey changes a person, transforms their very soul as they gain an expanded perspective. But the hero, despite having a convincing talisman of his unbelievable hero, I mean, you've known what you have conquered in yourself. Can you retain that self-assurance in the face of every sombering disillusionment that reality brings to us? How do we stop ourselves from bringing our gifts into the world? Are you shying away from opportunities to teach, to lead, to write a book, to take a course, to travel, to change jobs, to marry? What are the things you are scared of and shying away from? I'm aware that I am going over time, but if you can bear with me, we are getting there. The hero's journey is almost at an end. It is not an easy task to communicate a life-changing experience to people who haven't been there themselves. How do you communicate the genuine insights you have gained in your life to those around you, especially if they are not tangible? Campbell writes, How communicate to people who insist on the exclusive evidence of their senses, the message of the all-generating void? Many failures attest to the difficulties of this life-affirmative threshold. This first problem of the returning hero is to accept as real. After the experience of a soul-satisfying vision of fulfillment, to accept the passing joys and sorrows, banalities and noisy obscenities of life. How do we touch the face of God and then come and live a mundane life? Hartman and Zimbarov, in an article, The Hero's Journey of Self-Transformation, writes, the ego self must assimilate the mana essence in order to transport it, but the ego must do so without identifying with it, or everything is destroyed. This is the great dilemma of the return stage of the hero's journey, to claim the treasure without corrupting it. That is the ultimate challenge, to be able to claim the treasure with humility. They write that if the ego over-identifies and becomes possessed by the mana personality, that is extraordinary in us all, it can result in an ego inflation and arrogance. If the ego disowns and projects these mana personalities onto someone else, it can lead to idolizing that person and following blindly. When properly integrated, the conscious and unconscious complement each other. An unfolding of the wise self arises harmoniously with the healthy ego transcendence. After all, individuation is the attainment of a personality at midpoint between ego consciousness and the unconscious. Campbell asks, what is indeed the final outcome of the hero's journey? What now is the result of this miraculous passage and return? Why do we have to go through all these ordeals in life? James Hollis says, the act of consciousness is central, otherwise we are overrun by complexes. The hero in each of us is required to answer the call of individuation. We must turn away from the cacophony of the outer world to hear the inner voice. When we can dare to live its promptings, we can achieve personhood. We may become strangers to those who thought they knew us, but at least we are no longer strangers to ourselves. How can we safely traverse this dangerous, potentially shattering psychological landscape of archetypal patterns in order to expand our consciousness beyond the infantile fantasies our ego upholds as absolute truths? I hope I made it clear that the hero archetype is not about great heroic deeds in the external world. The hero's journey is the path of every man and woman needing to overcome shattering ordeals and master impossible tasks. Ultimately, an inner journey, even though prompted by outer events. Should we move through our suffering instead of getting stuck in it, we learn, and our consciousness grows. Firstly, about who we are, and secondly, about the role of the outer world in the development of the inner world. What is needed is a level of self-observation, self-knowledge, and a recognition of the archetypal patterns that flow through us, not belonging to us, but the vast collective unconsciousness which is the storehouse of all of humanity. According to many Western perspectives, the two worlds of divinity and humanity appear to be separate and distinct from each other. Similar to indigenous cultures, the hero upon his returns knows that the two worlds are intricately connected. Indeed, that the two worlds are one. This is the challenge and the hero's ultimate difficult tasks, since it is a massive shift in consciousness for most Westerners. Campbell writes, the two worlds, the divine and the human, can be pictured only as distinct from each other. Here is the great key to the understanding of myth and symbol. The two kingdoms are actually one. The realms of the gods is a forgotten dimension of the world, and the exploration of that dimension, either willingly or unwillingly, is the whole sense of the deed of the hero. Campbell answers the question of the result of that miraculous passage and return as follows. It is about the freedom to pass back and forth across the world division, not contaminating the principles of the one with those of the other, yet permitting the mind to know the one by virtue of the other, is the talent of the master. The cosmic dancer, declares Nietzsche, does not rest heavily in one single spot, but gaily, lightly turns and leaps from one position to another. It is possible to speak from one point at a time, but it does not invalidate the insights of the rest. I hope my presentation clarified that the hero's journey is not some romantic notion, but it is the perilous, arduous journey of individuation, growth, and transformation of consciousness, and it is not something that is easily achieved. Thank you so much for listening.